The last whisper of daylight faded across the Montana horizon as Delilah James sat alone at a hastily arranged dinner table in her small cabin, the emptiness around her illuminated by nothing but the dying embers in the hearth. Her wedding day had arrived and departed like a ghost rider present for a fleeting moment, then vanished without a trace, along with the man who had promised to make her his wife. Montana Territory, 1878. Not an easy place for a woman alone, especially one who had journeyed all the way from Boston with trunks filled with dreams and a wedding dress she'd sewn by hand through the long winter nights. Delilah stared at the untouched plates, the meal she'd spent days preparing now cold and congealed. No candles lit the table she had saved her last precious candles for this night, but in her devastation, she couldn't bear to light them. What was the point of illuminating her shame and disappointment? A sudden knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Visitors were rare this far out, especially after nightfall. Delilah hesitated, then reached for her father's old revolver before approaching the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Madam, sorry to disturb you. Name's Dawson Hayes. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back and I spotted your chimney smoke. I don't mean to impose, but I could use some shelter until morning." Delilah paused, weighing her options. She could turn him away, but the night was growing cold and her mother had raised her better than that. With a deep breath, she unlatched the door. The man who stood before her was trail-worn but carried himself with quiet dignity. His dark hat was pushed back on his head, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. Not a young man, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so, with the weathered look of someone who lived under the open sky. "You're welcome to come in, Mr. Hayes," she said finally, lowering the revolver but keeping it visible. "I can offer you coffee, but not much else." He stepped inside, removing his hat with a respectful nod. "That's mighty kind, madam. I don't need much." His gaze fell upon the table set for two, the untouched food, and his expression shifted with understanding. "Seems I've interrupted something," he said quietly. Delilah's laugh was brittle. "Not at all. My wedding dinner, actually, but the groom never arrived." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Dawson cleared his throat. "His loss, madam, if you don't mind me saying." She should have been offended by his forwardness, but instead, Delilah felt a surprising flicker of gratitude for his simple words. "The fire's dying," she noted, turning away to hide the glimmer of tears. "And I'm afraid I've no candles left." Dawson reached into his saddlebag. "As it happens, I do." He produced a slightly bent beeswax candle. "Not much, but it'll give some light." With calloused hands that moved with unexpected gentleness, he set the candle on the table and struck a match. The small flame danced to life, casting a warm glow that somehow made the room feel less empty. "There," he said. "A table needs a candle, especially on a night like this." Delilah watched as the light transformed the abandoned wedding dinner into something different, not a reminder of what she'd lost, but perhaps the beginning of something she hadn't expected to find. "Are you hungry, Mr. Hayes? It seems a shame to waste all this food." His smile was hesitant but genuine. "I wouldn't want to impose, Miss James, Delilah James, and you're not imposing, not tonight." As they sat down to the meal she'd prepared for another man, Delilah couldn't help but notice how the single candle's light caught the gentle creases around Dawson's eyes when he smiled. For the first time that day, she felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what brings you to this part of Montana?" she asked, passing him the plate of biscuits. "Just passing through, headed to Helena. Got some business there," he replied, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Been working cattle drives from Texas, but I'm looking to settle somewhere quieter. What about you, Miss James? Boston's a long way from here." Delilah looked up in surprise. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" His smile deepened. "Your accent hasn't quite let go of the East, and that teacup on your shelf at Staffordshire, isn't it? Not something you'd find in a Montana general store." She found herself impressed by his observation. "My mother's. One of the few things I brought with me." She paused, considering how much to reveal. I came out here to marry Henry Sullivan. We corresponded for nearly a year after he placed an advertisement for a bride. And he didn't show. Dawson's voice held no judgment, just a quiet understanding that made it easier for her to continue. No. Not a word. His ranches was about 5 miles east of here. This cabin belonged to his aunt. He arranged for me to stay here until the wedding. Delilah's fingers traced the edge of her plate. I arrived 3 weeks ago. Today was to be our wedding day. Dawson was silent for a moment. Have you been to his ranch to see if something might have happened? The question struck her like a physical blow. In her hurt and pride, she hadn't considered that Henry might be injured or worse. No, she admitted. I assumed he'd changed his mind. First light tomorrow, I'll ride over and check, Dawson offered. Man might be a fool, but he deserves a chance to explain himself. You don't have to do that, Delilah protested. I know I don't. His eyes met hers across the candle's flame, but I will. They finished the meal in companionable conversation, and Delilah found herself telling this stranger more about herself than she had intended about her father's death. Her mother's remarriage to a man who had no room in his life for his new wife's daughter, her correspondence with Henry, and the hope it had given her for a new beginning. Dawson spoke less of himself, though she learned he'd been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him ranching, and had fought briefly in the war before making his way west. There was something in his manner that suggested he carried his own disappointments. Though he wore them with a quiet grace she found herself admiring. When the meal was done, she insisted he take the small bedroom while she would sleep by the fire. He refused just as firmly, and in the end, they compromised he would sleep on a bedroll near the hearth, close enough to keep the fire stoked through the night. As Delilah prepared for bed, she found herself aware of the stranger's presence in a way that felt both unsettling and oddly comforting. The candle he'd given her still burned on the table, a small but steady light in what had been her darkest day. True to his word, Dawson was gone at first light, leaving behind freshly chopped wood for her stove and a note promising to return by midday. Delilah tried to occupy herself with chores, but her mind kept returning to the possibility that Henry might be injured or ill, and guilt gnawed at her for not checking sooner. The sun had barely reached its zenith when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She hurried outside to find Dawson returning, his expression grim. "What is it?" she asked, her heart sinking. He's alive," Dawson said, dismounting, "but he won't be coming for you, Miss James." "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Sullivan's ranch is occupied by him and his wife. They've been married for nearly 6 months. Delilah felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. His wife, but the letters. He wrote that he was looking for a bride. He was writing to several women, it seems. The wife Mary showed me the deed to the property. It's in both their names. Dawson's voice gentled. She knew nothing about you, said he'd mentioned expecting a housekeeper from back east, nothing more. The betrayal cut deep, but strangely, Delilah felt more numb than heartbroken. The man in Henry's letters, thoughtful, intelligent, kind, had never truly existed. She had fallen in love with a fiction. "There's more," Dawson continued reluctantly. "This cabin, it doesn't belong to any aunt. Sullivan's been renting it out to passing travelers. The owner is a man named Peterson in Helena. Sullivan's been collecting rent money that doesn't belong to him." Delilah sank onto the porch step, the full magnitude of her situation crashing down upon her. "So I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "And nearly all my savings went to the journey here." Dawson sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Did you sign anything, any papers about the cabin?" She shook her head. "No, Henry said we would handle all that after the wedding. That's something, at least." He was quiet for a moment. "What will you do now?" Delilah looked out at the vast Montana landscape, the mountains looming in the distance. It was beautiful in its wild way, so different from Boston's crowded streets. Despite everything, she wasn't ready to return east in defeat. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have enough money for perhaps a month. I can sew, teach, keep books. I'll find work somewhere." Dawson nodded slowly. I mentioned I was heading to Helena. There's a property there, nothing fancy but good land with a solid cabin. I've been saving for years to buy it." He paused. "The owner, Peterson, happens to be the same man who owns this cabin." Delilah looked at him in surprise. "Is that your business in Helena, to buy land?" "Yes, madam, been a long time coming." His eyes met hers, clear and direct. "I'm thinking, if you've nowhere pressing to be, you might come along to Helena. Peterson owns the hotel there too. He might have worked for a lady with your skills, at least until you decide what you want to do." It was a generous offer, especially from a man she barely knew. Yet something told her Dawson Hayes was a man of his word, unlike Henry Sullivan. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to be a burden." "No burden. I'm heading there anyway, and these trails can be dangerous for a woman alone." He stood, dusting off his trousers. "Take the day to think on it. We'd leave tomorrow if you decide to come." That evening they sat again at the table, this time with fresh venison Dawson had hunted. The same candle burned between them, somehow making the cabin feel more like a home than it had in the 3 weeks she'd lived there. "I've decided to accept your offer," Delilah said as they finished their meal. "I'll accompany you to Helena." Dawson nodded, his expression giving away little, though she thought she detected relief in his eyes. "We'll leave at first light. It's a 3-day journey if the weather holds." "Mr. Hayes," she began hesitantly, "I want to thank you. You've shown me great kindness when you had no reason to do so." His smile was brief but warm. "Sometimes a person just needs someone to light a candle in the dark, Miss James. Nothing more to it than that." But as he said it, the flame between them flickered, casting dancing shadows across his face, and Delilah wondered if perhaps there might be more to it after all. The journey to Helena tested them both. Spring in Montana territory was a capricious beast, bringing sunshine 1 hour and sleet the next. They traveled on horseback, Delilah on a gentle mare Dawson had persuaded Sullivan to provide as payment for the rent he'd wrongfully collected, though she suspected there had been more to that conversation than Dawson revealed. At night, they made camp beneath the stars, Dawson always maintaining a respectful distance, though his vigilance never wavered. He taught her to build a proper fire, to identify which plants were edible, to read the weather in the clouds. In return, she shared stories from her books, recited poetry she'd memorized, and mended his worn shirt with tiny, perfect stitches. On the second night, huddled close to the fire as a chill wind howled down from the mountains, Delilah found herself studying Dawson's profile as he stared into the flames. "You're a puzzle, Mr. Hayes," she said suddenly. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. "How's that?" "You speak like an educated man sometimes, yet you've lived the life of a cowboy. You notice fine china and can identify Keats, but you can also track game and survive in this wilderness." She tilted her head. "Who are you, really?" The firelight cast shadows across his face as he considered her question. "My father was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania," he said finally. "Had big plans for me to follow in his footsteps. Then the fever took both my parents when I was 12. My uncle out west was my only kin, so off I went." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged. "My uncle was a good man, tough but fair, taught me ranching but made sure I kept up with my books too, said my father would haunt him if he let my education slide." A rare smile crossed his face. "When I told him I wanted to be a rancher instead of a teacher, he just nodded and said, 'A man should know both the land and what's been written about it.'" "Wise advice," Delilah murmured. He was right. "I've met cowboys who could recite Shakespeare and Eastern gentlemen who couldn't saddle a horse to save their lives." Dawson poked at the fire. "Seems to me a person ought to know how to live in the world they've got, not just the one they wish for." His words resonated deeply with Delilah. Hadn't she spent years dreaming of escape, only to find herself unprepared for the reality of frontier life? Yet here she was, learning, adapting. The woman who had boarded the train in Boston would hardly recognize her now, with her sunburned nose and dirt under her fingernails. "What about you?" Dawson asked. What brought a Boston lady west to marry a man she'd never met? Delilah was quiet for a long moment. Adventure, partly, she admitted. But mostly escape. After my father died, there was nothing left for me in Boston except a future as a poor relation or a governess. Henry's letters painted such a picture of possibility: open skies, fresh air, a home of my own. She laughed softly. Even knowing what I know now, I can't regret coming west. It's beautiful here in a way I never imagined. It is that, Dawson agreed, his gaze shifting from the fire to her face. The look in his eyes made her breath catch a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames between them. They reached Helena on the afternoon of the third day. The town was larger than Delilah had expected, with proper streets lined with businesses, a courthouse of imposing stone, and even a small opera house. People hurried about their business, and for the first time in days, she felt conspicuously unkempt in her travel-worn dress. Dawson led them to a modest hotel on a side street. "Peterson owns this place," he explained as they dismounted. "He's expecting me, though not until tomorrow. We're a day early." The hotel owner, a balding man with shrewd eyes and a quick smile, greeted Dawson with a hearty handshake. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of Delilah, but he asked no questions as Dawson explained her situation, or a version of it, omitting Sullivan's deception and presenting Delilah simply as a lady in need of employment who had valuable skills. "Well now, that's fortunate timing," Peterson said, stroking his chin. "My wife's been complaining about keeping the books herself, what with the baby coming. If you can truly keep accounts, Miss James, we might just have an arrangement to discuss." "I can indeed, sir," Delilah assured him. "My father was an accountant and he taught me well." Peterson nodded approvingly. "Very good. We can discuss terms tomorrow. For tonight, you both must be exhausted. I've got 2 rooms available, the best in the house for you, Hayes, considering what you're here to do tomorrow." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "Any room will do fine." "Nonsense. It's not every day a man buys his first property. This calls for celebration." Peterson turned to Delilah with a conspiratorial wink. "This young man's been sending me payments for 3 years, saving for that riverside parcel. 20 acres with good water rights and a solid cabin. Smart investment." Delilah glanced at Dawson, surprised by the revelation. His expression remained neutral, but a hint of color had risen to his cheeks. 3 years is impressive dedication, Mr. Hayes," she said. "A man needs roots," he replied simply. They dined together that evening in the hotel's small restaurant, both freshly bathed and in clean clothes, Dawson in a shirt that looked rarely worn, and Delilah in the one good dress she'd saved from her trunk. The candle on their table reminded her of that first night, though this one was set in a silver holder, not stuck in a bottle as his had been. "Tomorrow you'll sign the papers for your land," she said, cutting into her beef steak, the first proper meal they'd had in days. "You must be excited." Dawson nodded, though something in his manner seemed reserved. "Been a long time coming." "What will you do with 20 acres? Raise cattle?" "Some. It's good grazing land, but I'm thinking more along the lines of horses. There's demand for well-trained stock in these parts." He took a sip of his coffee. "And you? If Peterson offers you work, will you stay in Helena?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Over their journey, something had shifted between them, a growing awareness, a deepening connection that neither had acknowledged aloud. "I think I will," she said carefully. "At least for now. Helena seems like a place where a woman might make her own way." "It is that," he agreed, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. After dinner, they stood awkwardly in the hallway between their rooms, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Miss James, Delilah," Dawson began, his usual composure faltering slightly. "I want you to know that whatever you decide to do, you'll do well. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." His words warmed her in a way that surprised her. "Thank you, Dawson. That means a great deal coming from you." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I've been meaning to give you this." He held out his hand, and in his palm lay the stub of the candle he'd lit that first night. "Seems fitting you should have it." Delilah took it, their fingers brushing, but it's nearly gone. Sometimes the ending of one thing is the beginning of another, he said quietly. Then with a gentle nod, turned and entered his room. Delilah stood in the hallway, the candle stub clutched in her hand, her heart racing with emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. Morning brought clarity and complications. Peterson was delighted with Delilah's bookkeeping knowledge and offered her a position that included room and board plus a small salary. It was more than she had hoped for, and she accepted gratefully. Dawson's business was concluded equally successfully. By midday, he was officially the owner of 20 acres of Montana land. Peterson insisted on opening a bottle of good whiskey to mark the occasion, and even Delilah had a small glass to toast Dawson's achievement. As they stood on the hotel's porch afterward, the reality of their situation settled between them. Their paths had intersected briefly but were now diverging. "I should head out to the property," Dawson said, his voice carefully neutral. "Need to see what condition the cabin's in before winter." Delilah nodded, fighting an unexpected sense of loss. "Of course, you've waited a long time for this day." "I have," he agreed, then added more softly, "though it's not quite what I expected." "No," he looked at her directly, his gray eyes earnest. "Things look different than they did 3 days ago." The implication of his words made her breath catch. 3 days ago, they'd been strangers. Now they were. "What exactly, Mr. Hayes?" Peterson called from inside the hotel, interrupting the moment. "There's a man here asking about purchasing one of your horses." Dawson excused himself, and Delilah retreated to her new room, her emotions in turmoil. She had come west for a fresh start, for marriage, for a home of her own. None of that had happened as planned, yet here she was with employment, a roof over her head, and the possibility of building her own life. And then there was Dawson Hayes with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. A man who had lit a candle in her darkest moment and shown her a path forward. A man who now had land of his own, just far enough from town to be peaceful, but close enough that a person could ride in when needed. When someone knocked on her door an hour later, she wasn't surprised to find him standing there, hat in hand. "I'm heading out," he said simply. "I see." She tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "I wish you all the best with your land, Mr. Hayes." "Dawson," he corrected gently. "And I was hoping you might ride out with me, just to see the place, if you wanted to." Hope fluttered in her chest. "I would like that very much." The land was everything Peterson had promised, a gently sloping meadow that led down to a clear running stream, backed by enough timber for building and winter fuel. The cabin was small but solidly constructed, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. It needed work, new chinking between the logs, repairs to the roof, a proper door to replace the worn canvas that currently hung in the doorway, but the bones were good. "What do you think?" Dawson asked as they stood on what would someday be a proper porch. "It's wonderful," Delilah said honestly. "You chose well," he nodded, surveying his property with quiet pride. "Needs work, lot of work, but it could be something special," he glanced at her. "The kind of place where a person might put down roots." "Yes," she agreed softly, "the kind of place a person might call home." They walked the property line together, Dawson pointing out where he planned to build corrals for the horses, where he might plant a garden come spring, how he'd divert some of the stream water for irrigation. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Delilah found herself offering suggestions that he considered with genuine interest. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. Dawson built a small fire in the hearth while Delilah unpacked the simple meal Mrs. Peterson had insisted on sending with them. "I should get you back to town before it gets too dark," Dawson said, though he made no move to leave. Delilah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the candle stub. "Or we could light this," she suggested. "Stay a little longer." Their eyes met across the small space and something unspoken passed between them. Dawson nodded slowly, then took the candle from her hand. He placed it carefully on the rough-hewn table and lit it with a match from his pocket. The tiny flame cast a warm glow around them, making the bare cabin feel almost cozy. "Delilah," he said, his voice low. "I need to say something, and I'm not a man who's good with words, but these past few days." "I know," she said simply. "I feel it too." He took a step closer. "When I found you sitting alone in that cabin I never expected, I wasn't looking for anything except shelter for the night. And I wasn't looking for anything except the man who'd written me all those letters." She smiled faintly. "It seems neither of us found what we were looking for. Maybe we found something better." His hand reached for hers hesitantly at first, then with certainty when she didn't pull away. "I know it hasn't been long. I know you came west for a different life than this. But I'm asking if you might consider, if you might want to see where this leads. No promises, no pressure, just possibility." Delilah looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, earnest and open in the candlelight. In Boston, such a proposal would have been scandalously improper, not even a proposal, really, just an invitation to explore what might be. But this wasn't Boston, and she wasn't the same woman who had left there. "Possibility," she echoed. "I like the sound of that." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, the candle still burned steadily between them, a small but determined flame against the gathering darkness. "Look at that," Dawson said softly. "Still burning." "Some things are meant to last," Delilah replied, and when he kissed her again, she felt as though she had finally, truly come home. 1 year later, Delilah stood on the now completed porch of the cabin, their cabin, watching as Dawson led a magnificent bay stallion into the largest of the 3 corrals they had built together. The Hayes Horse Ranch was small, but developing a solid reputation for quality stock. Dawson's skill with horses was matched by Delilah's head for business, and together they had turned the 20 acres into a thriving operation. The cabin, too, had been transformed. Fresh chinking, a proper door, curtains at the windows, and a small addition that served as their bedroom. Delilah's touch was evident everywhere, from the herb garden outside the kitchen window to the books that lined the shelves Dawson had built for her. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley in golden light, Dawson completed his work and walked back to join her on the porch. His face, tanned from days working outdoors, creased into a smile as he approached. "Beautiful evening," he remarked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Beautiful life," she replied, leaning into him. They stood together, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. Inside the cabin, on the table where they would soon share their dinner, a new candle waited to be lit, one of many Delilah had learned to make herself from beeswax and tallow. "Do you ever regret it?" Dawson asked suddenly. "Coming west for a man who never showed, ending up with a horse rancher instead of whatever Sullivan pretended to be?" Delilah turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious. "You know what I've learned this past year, Dawson Hayes? That sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments. That sometimes when you think your candle has gone out, someone comes along to light another. And sometimes—" She placed a hand gently on her stomach, where the first subtle roundness was just beginning to show. "Sometimes the future you never imagined turns out to be the one you were always meant to have." His eyes widened as he understood her meaning, then filled with such joy that Delilah felt her own heart might burst with happiness. "A baby," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You're certain?" She nodded, laughing as he lifted her in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around on the porch before setting her gently back on her feet, suddenly concerned. "Should you be resting? Do you need anything?" "I could ride into town for what I need," she interrupted with a smile, "is for you to kiss me, then light the candle on our table and share this evening with your wife. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." Dawson complied without hesitation, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. When they finally went inside, He lit the candle with the same care he had shown that first night when a heartbroken bride sat with no candle, and a cowboy lit one that changed both their lives forever. The flame burned steady and true, illuminating their simple home, their shared meal, their quiet conversation about the child that would join them come winter. Outside, the Montana night spread its star-filled canopy above the home they had built together, not the life either had planned, but one more precious than either could have imagined. And when they finally blew out the candle and retired to their bedroom, they did so secure in the knowledge that some lights, once kindled, never truly go out. They simply burn on, warming not just a cabin but a home, not just a marriage but a life built on love that began with a single flame in the darkness.